Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
From French Huguenots to the Jewish refugees from Tsarist Russia to the docking of the Empire Windrush.
Today, Rwanda of all places was trending in India, all thanks to Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Britain. He came up with a plan to send asylum seekers in the UK to Rwanda. It was controversial from the word go. His Home Secretary Preeti Patel personally went to Rwanda to seal the deal. The matter landed in courts. British courts gave the green signal. Protests intensified as migrants were made to board the plane to Rwanda. It did not take off though. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you why. Also why this policy is so controversial. Britain has every right to not grant asylum. But can it dump these people into another country thousands of miles away? Is it legally right? Is it morally right? Britain is debating these questions. The Prime Minister was hoping that the policy was at least politically right. But there's no telling now. Tonight we'll discuss how a revamped colonial-era policy to deport unwanted individuals to far-off lands has backfired.
From the French Huguenots to the Jewish refugees from Tsarist Russia to the docking of the Empire Windrush to the South Asians fleeing East Africa to the many, many others who have come from different countries at different times for different reasons. All have wanted to be here because our United Kingdom is a beacon of openness and generosity.
The United Kingdom is a beacon of openness and generosity. That was Boris Johnson in April this year. For a country that's dumping immigrants into Rwanda, that is rich. You already know about Johnson's plan. His government wants to get rid of asylum seekers, so they ship them off. Fly them off, more like, all the way to Rwanda, some 6,500 kilometers away from London. What would it cost Britain? Some money and a one-way ticket for these immigrants. The first flight was supposed to leave on Tuesday. It did not. Quite a dramatic twist there. Look at the pictures on your screen. The migrants had boarded the plane. It was on the tarmac, all set to depart, but the flight never took off. All thanks to the European Court of Human Rights. It stopped the deportation at the very last minute. The lawyers of these immigrants had gone to the European Court. They stopped the departure of the plane, and now the legality of this entire proposal will be tested. Can Britain dump asylum seekers into Rwanda? Does this violate international law? These are the questions being debated, apart from the moral ones, of course. And this is where it leaves Boris Johnson. Last week, he barely managed to survive a leadership test. This week, his deportation plan has backfired. Let's begin with what happened yesterday and what a spectacular failure it was for London. More than 10,000 illegal migrants, more than 10,000, have entered Britain this year. The UK identified 130 people to deport, 130. Eventually, only 7 of them could be put on a flight. Just 7. What about the others? Well, they went to court. They challenged the orders and they managed to get their deportation overturned. But 7 out of 130 got no relief from British courts. Who were these people? 3 Iranians, 1 Syrian, 1 Albanian, 1 Iraqi and 1 Vietnamese citizen. The United Kingdom wanted to make an example out of these people, so it arranged a massive plane, a plane that can accommodate 200 people. The British government hired it to transport just 7 migrants. Perhaps they were desperate to show how well their plan works. Well, it did not. The European Court intervened at the last moment. The migrants had sought relief from this court and they got it. The European Human Rights Court has raised several questions about Britain's policy. It wants to know if Rwanda is a safe country for migrants. and how easily the migrants can be called back if something goes wrong. So the Rwanda plan is now caught in a legal tangle. The next hearing will be in July. It will decide the future of this policy. But Britain seems undeterred. It is already preparing for the next flight. In Parliament today, the British government defended the Rwanda plan. They want to make sure it sails. They've already paid Rwanda more than $150 million for infrastructure. So Boris Johnson is now attacking the opposition. He says the Labour Party is defending traffickers and that the lawyers who oppose this plan are, quote unquote, abetting criminal gangs.
Mr. Speaker, we are on the side of the travelling public. By the way, he hasn't mentioned this, but they're on the side of the people traffickers who would risk people's lives at sea, Mr. Speaker. And we are on the side of people who come here safely and legally. Safely and legally, Mr. Speaker. They carp and snipe from the sidelines. That's what they've always done.
The UK government is confident. It believes it can overcome the legal challenges. But how will it deal with the opposition from within? Civil servants in England are protesting. This includes members of the Home Office. They have put up fake deportation notices. One of them has a picture of the Paddington Bear, the popular character from children's books. The notice says, "Have you seen this individual?" Yesterday, there were protests outside the Home Office. Hundreds of people attended. Former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, was among them. More high-profile leaders are challenging the Rwanda plan. Among them is the leader of the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. He dominated the front pages of several British newspapers yesterday. He has written an open letter criticising the policy. This immoral policy shames Britain. That's what he said, his words. Reports say Prince Charles is also against the plan. The future King of England apparently called it appalling in private. His office has refused to comment about the report, but more importantly, they did not deny the prince's alleged comments. Now, why do these people find the Rwanda plan so troubling? Because it reminds them of Britain's troubling imperial past. The British Empire, too, transported migrants, slaves and indentured workers were taken from India to British colonies. They went to countries like Fiji, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, British Guiana, Jamaica, Trinidad. Boris Johnson's Rwanda plan is a modern-day adaptation of the same policies. It does not address the global refugee crisis, and it will not end the problem of criminal gangs. By the way, Israel had a similar arrangement with Rwanda back in 2017. It fell apart. Do you know why? Israel sent about 4,000 migrants to Rwanda. Only 9 of them ended up staying. The rest simply left. So this is what it comes down to. The Rwanda plan is a political move. It was meant to rally the anti-immigration voters. It was meant to rescue Boris Johnson's political career. Well, now it has backfired and turned into a new crisis for the British Prime Minister. Now, there are some things you should never do in life, like get a swastika tattoo in Germany, insult football in Brazil, or tell a South Asian not to drink tea. That's a big no around here. Having a cup of tea is like your birthright in South Asia. But soon there could be one exception, and that's Pakistan. Their government wants people to cut down on tea. The appeal came from Ehsan Iqbal, Pakistan's Minister for Planning and Development. Listen to this.
मैं ये भी कौम से अपील करूंगा कि हम चाय की एक-एक प्याली 2-2 प्यालियां कम कर दें, क्योंकि जो चाय हम इंपोर्ट करते हैं वो भी हम उधार लेकर इंपोर्ट करते हैं.
Everyone loves a good cutting chai. Mumbai, they say, makes the best one. But Pakistan has taken it quite literally. They're actually cutting chai. The question is why? Why touch something that is so close to people's hearts? Because they cannot afford it. In 2020, Pakistan was the largest importer of tea. Their total purchases around $640 million. Pakistan simply cannot afford to spend that kind of money on tea. Their foreign exchange reserves are falling every month. In February, they held reserves worth $16 billion. By the month of May, that fell to $10 billion. How long will these reserves last? barely enough to cover 2 months of imports. So Pakistan needs to spend every dollar wisely, and apparently tea does not make the cut. Will this policy make any difference in Pakistan? It seems highly unlikely. For starters, how can the government possibly monitor this? People drink tea at their home, at restaurants. You cannot track the intake of 220 million people. The only hope is if people cut down themselves, and that is near impossible in a country like Pakistan. So cutting down tea is a gimmick. While the leaders load up on their favorite drink, the people are being asked to cut down. How convenient is that? What Pakistan needs are sensible policies, and they need them fast because the country is now facing another major challenge: power cuts. Russia's war has created an energy crisis around the world, even here in India. But the situation in Pakistan is even more precarious. First, the numbers. How much electricity is Pakistan producing? Around 22,000 megawatts. How much is the requirement? Around 26,000 megawatts. So the deficit is around 15%. And this drop is being reported across the board. Power from LNG is down 2%, hydroelectric power down 7%, coal-fired power down 10%. The result is this: long and painful power cuts in Pakistan. In the cities, they last for around 10 to 12 hours. In rural areas, 14 to 16 hours every day. And remember when this is happening, in the middle of one of the worst heat waves in recent times. Temperatures in Pakistan have reached 45 degrees Celsius. Imagine that, 15-hour-long power cuts in 45-degree heat. So this energy crunch is not just an economic crisis, it could well be a humanitarian disaster. How did things reach this point? Because Pakistan bet on the wrong partners. One is China, the others are Italy and Qatar. We'll start with China. Under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, Beijing operates power plants in Pakistan, more than a dozen of them. Put together, these plants make up a sizable chunk of Pakistan's output. Now, most of them are shut. Chinese power plants have simply turned off the lights. Why? Because Pakistan has not paid them. Around $1.5 billion are due to be paid. Power bills, $1.5 billion. So the Iron Brother flipped the switch. They plunged Pakistan into darkness. These power payments are a sticking point between Pakistan and the IMF too, the International Monetary Fund. The IMF wants them to be renegotiated. China, as always, is refusing to do so. That's one of the reasons behind this power crisis. Another reason is Pakistan's failed bet on LNG, liquefied natural gas. Pakistan had struck multiple long-term deals with LNG suppliers like Eni in Italy and a few others from Qatar. These companies were supposed to pump LNG into Pakistan. Well, now they're not doing it. Instead, they're selling LNG in more lucrative markets like Europe. So LNG that was meant for Pakistan is now flowing to Europe. Now, I know what you're thinking. Aren't there penalties for that sort of a thing? Yes, there are. Pakistan's penalty for cancellation is around 30%. But the market prices are so high that companies do not care. Even after this penalty, they're making huge profits. Like I said, Pakistan bet on all the wrong people: China, Qatar and Europe. And their citizens are now paying the price for this. Pakistan has been forced to buy LNG at spot prices from the market. They got a shipment last month. Guess how much it cost them? $100 million for one shipment, the highest that Pakistan has ever paid. Now, usually governments try to cushion this blow. They give subsidies to people to make things easier for them. But Pakistan cannot do that either. Because to get an IMF bailout, they must remove all fuel subsidies. So the government of Pakistan is left with piecemeal tactics like asking people to work from home, or restricting the use of air conditioners, or turning off street lights, and now asking Pakistanis to give up their cup of tea. So Pakistan's suffering can be explained in two phrases: bad policy and Chinese debt. Well, that's also the story of Sri Lanka. And soon there may be another member in this club, Laos, situated in Southeast Asia, bordered by Myanmar and China, a country of 7.5 million people. The economy of Laos is on life support. The diagnosis is exactly the same as Sri Lanka and Pakistan. The cash reserves are dwindling, the debt is high, and there is a serious risk of default. The crisis has reached the streets. Just like Sri Lanka, there is serious shortage of fuel. There are long queues outside petrol stations. Some desperate citizens have now begun driving to Thailand to refuel their cars. Their currency has collapsed, and that's complicating the situation. The currency of Laos is called the kip. It has lost 36% of its value against the dollar. Then you have rising inflation. Last month, it hit almost 13%. That's the highest since 2004. Just like Sri Lanka and Pakistan, Laos too has been forced to resort to extreme measures. It is now considering banning citizens from holding foreign currencies. So how serious is this problem? Let's look at the foreign reserves of Laos. How much money does this country have? As of December last year, about $1.3 billion. And that won't be enough to make ends meet. Every year, till 2025, Laos has to pay roughly the same amount to its creditors outside the country, $1.3 billion every year. So they practically have no money. The country is on the brink of bankruptcy. The credit ratings agencies agree. They have downgraded the credit rating of Laos. It is now rated as CAA3, which is basically poor. Ratings agencies have identified three problems: weak governance, insufficient foreign exchange reserves, and a very high debt burden. How much money does Laos owe to its creditors? $14.5 billion. That's 88% of the GDP of Laos. Laos owes about half, or around $7 billion, to China alone of this external debt. In recent years, Laos has borrowed heavily from China. The Chinese have funded hydropower projects in the country, also a railway line that connects Laos to China. Almost $6 billion was spent on this project alone. And now that same debt is hurting Laos. The problem can be solved with a fix, a simple fix. Laos has to convince China to grant some debt relief, maybe rework some of the payment deadlines. But just like Sri Lanka, China has refused to make any concessions. Here is how one expert described China's role in the crisis, and I'm quoting, "The big unknown is what happens with China. The big unknown is what happens with China." This is what the expert said. Beijing has given some debt relief to Laos in recent years, but there is no guarantee of future relief. Laos is just one of the victims, by the way. The war in Ukraine could set off a bigger debt bomb. China has given out $385 billion to 165 countries as loans. $385 billion to 165 countries. Out of these, 42 are low to middle income countries. How much money do they owe to China? More than 10% of their GDP. Laos is on this list. So is Sri Lanka. Who else? Other Asian countries like the Maldives, Pakistan, Myanmar, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan. These countries are all caught in China's debt trap. You see, Chinese loans are designed to be unsustainable. Just consider this. China lent to Pakistan at an interest rate of almost 4%. Do you know how much the West charges? Just 1.1% interest on its loans. China charges almost 4%. So China's rates are very high. Another problem, most of the Chinese debt remains hidden. Chinese financing is non-transparent. It is not reported to global institutions like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. You see, in smaller countries, China does not lend to state institutions directly. It creates something called special purpose vehicles. What are these special purpose vehicles? They're basically companies. China gives out loans through these companies, and this allows China to keep the terms of the loans hidden. And that's how China avoids the scrutiny of the world. Once these countries fail to keep up with the payments, they're left with few choices. Usually they end up compromising their sovereignty. They're forced to sell off their assets. We saw it in the case of Pakistan, then in Sri Lanka. The next could be Laos. And it will not be the last on this list. Let's shift our attention to Iran now. Negotiations to revive the Iran nuclear deal are as good as dead. Tehran is stepping up pressure on the West. First, it removed surveillance cameras at nuclear sites. Now it might launch a rocket into space. The United States is worried. It says Tehran is deliberately raising tensions. But why is America worried about Iran's space program? Our next report has the answer.
In this Iranian desert, preparations are underway for a rocket launch. This is the Imam Khomeini spaceport in Semnan. Satellites have captured activity at this site. There is some equipment inside what looks like a launch pad. A missile stands right in the middle, waiting to take off. It is unclear what this launch will accomplish. But the West is nervous. The US says Iran's rocket launches defy a UN Security Council resolution. It calls on Tehran to undertake no activity related to ballistic missiles since they can be used to mount a nuclear attack. The US is worried that Iranian space missions could enable its nuclear program. Learnings from space missions can be applied to building missiles that deliver nuclear payloads. For some time now, Iran has been trying to perfect the art of launching satellites. In the past decade, Iran has sent satellites to the Earth's orbit. Tehran could attempt another one soon. The US intelligence community has issued a threat assessment. It says a satellite launch vehicle shortens the timeline to build an intercontinental ballistic missile. But the US could be overestimating Iran's capabilities. Iran's Simorgh rocket program has failed to deliver. Its last 5 launches have failed. In 2019, a launch attempt turned deadly. A fire broke out in one of the buildings of the Iranian Space Research Center. 3 researchers died in the incident. But the failures did not dent Iran's determination. Tehran has set an ambitious target. It wants to send 7 homemade satellites to space by March 2023. Iran is also hinting at testing a new rocket. It will be called the Zuljana. Tehran could use it to launch more satellites. Whatever the outcome of these launches, one thing is certain. The tensions between Iran and the West are set to escalate. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
All of this makes you wonder, what are international organizations up to? Debt traps, expansionism, conflict. Their whole purpose was to prevent all of this, to build peace and cooperation. Perhaps it was an impossible dream to start with. As we speak, another organization is sinking into irrelevance. The WTO, the World Trade Organization. More than 100 trade ministers are meeting in Geneva. Among them is India's Piyush Goyal. It is the first major meeting in almost 4 years, also a shot at redemption. The WTO has become a sitting duck recently. China wages illegal trade wars all over the world. The WTO does nothing. Big Pharma refuses to share vaccine formulas. The WTO does nothing. So this meeting is a make or break moment for them. The WTO has to secure at least one major deal. And they have chosen this one, a global fisheries agreement. What does it do? This agreement seeks to end all fishery subsidies. The idea is to stop overfishing, to protect marine life. It sounds agreeable, doesn't it? But after days of haggling, there is no deal in Geneva. Because one country is opposing the deal, and that country is India. Here's how Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal defended India's position.
25,000 मछुआरों के परिवारों को सुरक्षित रखने के लिए इतनी चिंता करते हैं कि जो सब्सिडीज वो दे रहे हैं उसको तो चाहते हैं कि वो चालू रहे, और हमारे जैसा देश जहां लाखों की संख्या में मछुआरे हैं उनके ऊपर प्रतिबंध लाने की कोशिश की जा रही है.
Well, a lot has been said about this stance, that India is obstructing an agreement, that India is not playing fair. But the fact is, India is looking out for its own people, for its own fishermen. And I'll give you 2 reasons why. Number one, this whole proposal is supposed to stop overfishing, to reduce marine pollution. In that case, shouldn't the polluters take the lead, the big polluters, mainly North America and Europe? These regions polluted the seas for decades. The likes of India came in much later. So why must every country take equal responsibility for this problem? The West created it, so the West must play a bigger role in solving it. Reason number 2, fishing in India is not like fishing in the West. It employs around 14.5 million Indians. And these are not your rich trawler-owning bosses. These are ordinary fishermen. They still go out in small boats. Sometimes they get arrested in Pakistan or Sri Lanka. Why? Because in their desperation, they go beyond India's waters. These are the people who get subsidies in India. And that's not all. India's subsidies are way less than some other places. Let me show you some data. China's fisheries subsidies are around 7.3 billion. The European Union, 3.8 billion. The United States, 3.4 billion. And India, just $277 million. There is simply no comparison. So India pushed for a counter-proposal in Geneva. It had two major points. A, developed countries must end subsidies for 25 years. And B, developing countries get a 25-year transition period. The current draft calls for 7 years. India is pushing for 25, but the WTO is refusing to budge. And look at the narrative being built. Here's what one diplomat said in Geneva. India is being obstructive across the piece, whether it be on e-commerce, fisheries or agriculture. Obstructive, they say. When Europe buys Russian gas to keep their lights on, diplomats don't say anything. That's energy security. When Joe Biden plans to visit Saudi Arabia, diplomats say nothing. The same Saudi Arabia he promised to make a pariah. That is America's national interest. But when India stands up for 14 million fishermen, diplomats find their voice. That is convenient. Think back to last year. India and South Africa were pushing to unlock vaccine formulas, to waive the patents. How many Western countries supported that? I could count them on one hand. Diplomats did not call that obstructive. They came up with ways to defend their position, which is why the WTO has become a sitting duck. It offers every member state, a veto power, which means multilateral agreements require unanimous consent. Well, good luck in this political atmosphere. The World Trade Organization was created 27 years back. Guess how many multilateral agreements it has sealed? One. One deal in 27 years. And the reason is quite simple. The developed world and the developing world have different priorities. On fishing, on free trade, on agriculture. And those priorities never meet. I'm not saying we must dismantle the World Trade Organization or that countries should do whatever they want to. Global trade does need a referee. But at this rate, who will listen to that referee? Especially if they favor one playing side all the time. Now here's a midweek experiment for you. Go to any celebrity's social media page, anyone. Go to their latest post. Now scroll down and read the comments. I can guess what you will see. Some flattering replies, some critical remarks, and a lot of insults. It has become commonplace on social media. People hate on you for no reason. They swear at you. They criticize you. They make you feel bad. At least they try to. In most cases, for absolutely no reason. Japan has come up with a solution for all of this. Their parliament has made online insults punishable. Or should I say, more punishable. The existing laws did not call for stringent penalties, a fine of $75 and detention for less than 30 days, that's all. The new laws are much stronger. You will have to pay $2,200 in fine and you could land in jail for 1 full year. Why has Japan introduced these new laws? Because of an incident in 2020. A 22-year-old television star, Hana Kimura, died by suicide. She starred in a famous Netflix show. The whole country was shocked by her death. But soon, shock turned to curiosity. Why did a 22-year-old, a successful 22-year-old, end her life? Many fans pointed to the online hate she received. Kimura herself shared some of those comments. And on that same day, she died by suicide. Clearly, there was a link. The police ended up arresting 3 men on charges of cyberbullying, and 2 years later, there is political action. New laws to stop online insults. The question is, will it work? Well, a lot depends on police work. Most users do not hurl insults from their own accounts. They use fake ones. And that means additional work for the authorities in Japan. Chase the fake account, find the person behind it, and then arrest them. Also, who defines what is an insult? That's what some opposition lawmakers wanted to know. What if this law is used to target dissidents? To convince the critics, Japan added a new provision. This law will be re-examined in 3 years. If the impact is positive, it stays. If not, it could be removed. Now, we hope the new laws do exactly what they're designed to do, because online hate is a very serious problem, especially for youngsters. I've got some data for you. 37% of teens have been bullied online. 30% have been bullied more than once. Instagram is said to be the most toxic. 43% teens on Instagram reported cyberbullying. And this can take many forms. Some users insult your looks, others make fun of your opinion, or maybe even your loved ones. It's easy to dismiss them as trolls, but sometimes these insults stick. The case of Hana Kimura is the perfect example. She had everything going for her, yet the insult stuck. Japan's law will help to cut that down. After all, 1 year in jail is a long time. People will think twice before insulting someone online. But that alone may not be enough. Social media companies must also join the campaign. How can they pitch in? For starters, by banning fake accounts, or else these cyber crimes will continue. I'll give you an example from India, and it's an extreme case. In November last year, a Twitter user issued rape threats against cricketer Virat Kohli's daughter. The police traced the IP address. They chased the user down to Hyderabad. But guess what happened next? The man was granted bail by a court in Mumbai. The bail plea said that merely tracing the IP address is not enough, and the court agreed. Do you see the problem here? There is a grey area around creating fake accounts, around tracing hateful comments on social media. Many cyber criminals use this grey area. They get away with their online hate campaigns. Public figures are clearly the worst affected. Every move of theirs is criticized online. The way they look, the way they walk, the way they talk, and sometimes these insults leave a lasting impact. Japan has found an interesting way to tackle this, but clearly more needs to be done. Not just in Japan, but everywhere. If the goal is to end online abuse, big tech will have to be roped in. If not, loopholes can always be found. Now, speaking of solutions and problems, climate change is a problem. We all have solutions. We know what needs to be done to save our planet. But we're not doing it enough. The consequences of our inaction are becoming grimmer by the day. In New Zealand, for example, flocks of penguins are being washed ashore. At least 500 of them have died in the last 30 days alone. Experts say the worst is yet to come. But how did climate change kill penguins? Here's a report.
Penguins are a delight to watch. Unless, of course, they're dead. Then it's an unfortunate sight. Also a common sight in New Zealand. Dead penguins are washing up on the beaches of New Zealand. These are the koraras, the world's smallest penguins. They are less than a foot tall and weigh around 1.5 kilograms. Koraras are native to New Zealand. On a normal day, you would find them waddling around the beach. But now they are being found decaying on the beaches. This is the 9 Mile Beach. Nearly 200 penguins washed up here recently. In May, a flock of 109 were found dead. At least 100 penguins were found dead in Cable Bay. 40 at the Tokerau Beach. Some estimates that 500 penguins have washed up on New Zealand's beaches since the start of May. The number could soon touch 1,000. This is being called a mass death year. But why are the mass deaths happening? Experts point at climate change. They say the dead penguins are all extremely underweight, meaning the birds have been starving. What do the koraras eat? Small fish from the ocean. Are we to conclude that the oceans have run out of small fish? Is it because of overfishing? Experts once again point at climate change. Koraras can only dive up to 30 meters in search of prey. When the ocean waters become warm, the small fish go deeper in search of more habitable temperature, so they become out of reach for the koraras. 2021 was New Zealand's warmest year on record, and the result is in front of our eyes. Starvation also means a penguin's body loses the ability to protect itself from the cold. As a result, the bird dies of hypothermia. Human activities have endangered one of the most popular creatures of the animal kingdom. Big and small penguins are suffering alike. Have you heard of the emperor penguins? They are the world's largest penguins, also the tallest. Some of these birds can be as tall as 4 feet. Emperor penguins live in Antarctica. They give birth during the winter months. Since the ice in this part of the world has been melting prematurely, many non-swimmer newborns are drowning in the cold water. The Weddell Sea is home to the second largest colony of the emperor penguin. All chicks here have died for 3 straight years. This is the cost of climate change.
Now, unless you've been living under the rock, you've heard about the BTS taking a break. It's the most talked about break since Ross and Rachel. If that joke's lost on you and you aren't really a fan of K-pop either, you still have nothing to worry about because we'll start with the ABC. Let's first show you what is BTS. It's a Korean boy band. BTS made its debut in 2013. In the last 9 years, BTS has broken many international charts. They've shattered gender norms by wearing lipstick and earrings. The band became the first K-pop group to perform at American Music Awards, also the first Koreans to secure a Grammy nomination. This band is South Korea's biggest cultural export. Today, you'll find BTS songs playing everywhere. Clubs, public transport, Instagram reels. Ask any teenager or preteen and she will recite the names of BTS members with the same sincerity as telling the table of 12. There are 7 members. Together, they are the face of K-pop. BTS has addressed the United Nations. They've collaborated with UNICEF, performed at all coveted platforms, be it the Times Square or New Year's Eve, or the Grand Central Terminal, collaborated with some of the biggest names in the music industry, Ed Sheeran, the Chainsmokers, you name it. Earlier this month, BTS visited the White House, met US President Joe Biden, called out the growing anti-Asian hate crimes in the US. Long story short, BTS is more than just a boy band. And now it's a thing of the past. BTS has decided to take a break.
I think now finally we have come to think about what kind of artists we each want to be remembered as to our fans. I think that's why we are having a tough time now. It is time to discover more of our identity. So it is a bit exhausting and we need to take some time for that.
The fans are heartbroken, but I think some of them may have seen this coming. This is not the first time a band has decided to take a break at the peak of its career. You must have heard about the Beatles. It was the first boy band to become a global sensation. In 1969, band member John Lennon decided to leave. In 1970, Paul McCartney announced his own solo album, and that was the end. If the Beatles ruled the 1960s, the 90s were all about the Backstreet Boys. The boy band broke up in 2006 after Kevin Richardson decided to pursue other interests. The same happened with One Direction in 2015. The boy band was on top of its game when Zayn Malik decided to go solo. And why just boy bands? Remember PCD. It's the same band that collaborated with A.R. Rahman. The band split up after some members were reportedly not okay with their lead getting all the attention. Same with Fifth Harmony and Camila Cabello, or Spice Girls and Victoria Beckham. And this has become a bit of a pattern. In every music band, one member invariably becomes more popular than the rest. Either he or she walks out or builds a personal brand, like in the case of Scherzinger or Zayn Malik, or another member walks out in refusal to live under someone else's shadow. Jungkook is that popular face for the BTS. He is the band's youngest member, all of 24, recently released his solo song. This was days before he, along with the band, announced the break. One BTS member said the setup did not allow him to mature. They all agreed that they needed time to pursue solo projects. Together, the BTS is worth $3 billion. In 2019, the band sold $130 million in merchandise alone. Each band member is worth around $30 million. And all of these people are in their 20s. They have their whole life in front of them and a global fan base to support them in their solo careers. Jungkook may not be the reason behind the band taking a break. One member, for example, said that he thinks that he's become the voice for the of the band. Why? Because he alone is fluent in English. So when touring internationally, he ends up taking most of the questions. And this, he says, makes him guilty. Another member said he feels exhausted. That's the thing about bands and teamwork. It either exhausts you, especially if you are struggling to match the others, or it makes you greedy, makes you think you can achieve much more alone. Well, BTS may have broken many barriers. The band has seen many firsts. But they seem to have succumbed to the same fate that most bands in the music industry could not escape. We'll see where the story goes. And now, before we wrap the show tonight, before we call it a day, there's a report that I want to talk about. Earlier today, I came across a survey that said that most people are avoiding news because they find it depressing. Now, as someone who works in the news industry, this obviously has bothered me, so I decided to dig a little deeper. It turns out half of those surveyed said that they were put off by news because of too much Wuhan virus coverage. And I couldn't help but ask myself, how is that bad? How is it bad to report on the biggest story of our time? In fact, not reporting it would be a disservice to journalism. So to those who resonate with the survey, to those who think news has become negative, I have this to say. News has become negative because we are living in times that are negative, unfortunately. The daily news is nothing but a reflection of our times. It's a reflection of what happens around us. In the last 24 hours, for example, one country tried to dump asylum seekers in a conflict zone. Another has told its people to avoid drinking something as basic as tea. Penguins were washed ashore dead. We had no choice but to tell you about all of it, because if we don't, we would be failing at our jobs. What's worse, we would have been doing injustice to your time. You know, there are days when we too realize that stories are becoming too sad, and there are days we actively look for happier headlines to share. Of late, we've been struggling to find those. The pandemic, the approaching global recession, the climate crisis, the war, they've hardly left any scope for happier headlines. So as someone who's in the news business, I thought we owed you an explanation in case you too think that news was getting too depressing, too much politics, too much coverage of COVID. I would say hang in there, don't switch off, because until you get to know about the problems plaguing our times, until you understand those problems, how will you go about solving them? Think about it. We will look at what else is making news across the world. This is Gravitas Global Headlines.
Russia says it would establish a humanitarian corridor to evacuate civilians from a chemical plant in Severodonetsk as Ukrainian forces wage a desperate battle for control of the city. The new I2U2 grouping of India, Israel, UAE and the US will hold its first virtual summit next month. The first of its kind virtual summit of the grouping will hold discussions on food security crisis and other areas of cooperation. US President Joe Biden will meet Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman during a trip to the Middle East in July, in a break with his campaign pledge of making the kingdom a pariah as he struggles to combat record-high US gasoline prices. The European Union chief Ursula von der Leyen says that the bloc wants to strengthen its energy cooperation with Israel during her visit to the country. This as Moscow said it would be slashing gas deliveries via the Nord Stream pipeline by more than 40%. Clashes break out in several cities in Ecuador after police detained the leader of the country's largest indigenous organization after he led blockades in protest against the government's economic policies. 2 police officers were shot dead during their duty in Los Angeles on Tuesday. The officers belonged to the El Monte Police Department and were investigating a possible stabbing in an LA suburb. Europe's stocks rebound on opening after the European Central Bank called an emergency meet to address volatile markets, while investors also brace for a major US rate hike. Hong Kong reports over 1,000 new COVID-19 infections, the first time the daily tally has topped 1,000 mark since mid-April, as cases crept up ahead of celebrations on the 25th anniversary of the city's handover to mainland China. Hungary thrashed England 4-0 and condemned the Three Lions to their worst home defeat since 1928. The Hungarians are top of the Nations League group, which also includes heavyweights Germany and Italy. The Germans beat European champions Italy 5-2. England's Joe Root has returned to the top of the ICC men's test batting rankings. Root moves past Australia's Marnus Labuschagne after scoring centuries in both of England's victories over world champions New Zealand.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
En même temps, tu passes, hein. Même si tu te tiens debout. Ouais.